Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to talk about something fairly simple, but it's also complex at the same time, and that's why are there so many bad movies coming out of Hollywood? Now, this isn't the ravings of a 52-year-old guy who's remembering the glory years of the 1980s, but it's something a lot of people have noticed. Movies are just lousy, and they're quite awful, and they've been awful for a long time, and it's just one of those things that, well, why is it happening? So let's look into that and some of the reasons why, and maybe some will surprise you, maybe some won't. The first thing is there's this issue that's going on. It's been going on for a while, and it's called the blockbuster mentality. Now, here's a fun bit of trivia. Do you know what the first summer blockbuster movie was? The movie that kicked off the whole idea of what it means to be a blockbuster. Give up? It was Jaws. So that's quite a while ago. But what that does is, though, it creates the idea of, you know what? We need to make the big movie that gets so many people in. So today we talk about billion-dollar movies. Like, boy, we need to have that billion-dollar movie. Movie's got to make $1 billion. Well, that's a whole blockbuster mentality. So instead of making a bunch of movies and hoping for the best, they just focus on making blockbusters. And that's a big problem because what you're trying to do then is, going overboard with a huge budget, big stars, lots of big stars per movie, and just constantly trying to wow people all the time instead of focusing on things like, plot, narrative, the overall theme, quality acting, quality writing. It's just bigger and more bombastic trying to get those dollars from the next billion-dollar movie. And this blockbuster effect is a terrible thing for creativity. So if you like to have movies that maybe push boundaries in art or ask tough questions, those get pushed aside because they need something that relates to everybody. It's the big blockbuster movie. So, we see that as a problem. So then what else do we see as an issue? We see basically a problem where you have a concept movie being created. And the concept movie is basically, it's driven by the international distribution. So the idea of something that will play well everywhere. Again, this is another problem because instead of just having a good old-fashioned film for America, we have to make sure it's going to play well in China because that's a large market. We have to make sure it's going to play well in Europe because that's a large market. And we think about, how's it going to fit? How's it going to feel? And that ends up changing things. So, if we're going to have it here, and if it's going to play well there, we can't say anything bad about them. And so instead of having like a good old-fashioned American movie where you have this known enemy, you have to change it to some obscure country that could never have an army to attack America anyway, or it would be a situation where it's a totally made-up country that no one ever's heard of because it doesn't exist, because we can't name an actual one because we don't want to hurt our theater prospects in that country. So you can see that whole idea of that being a problem. So now we have the problem where we're making the movies, the blockbusters for everyone. Also having the concept movies that are playing well everywhere to everybody. And you see that becoming a big problem. And the other thing that happens when they're creating movies is they focus a lot on audience research. And by audience research, this isn't something new because we've had situations where they have surveys or test screenings or things like that. And they do a lot of market testing now before the film's ever made and to see what people think. And instead of saying, look, this is the artistic vision and we're going to sell it, it's, audiences think this, so let's tweak. Audience thinks that, so let's tweak. Audience now think this, so let's tweak. And they keep changing or doing major reshoots. The Supergirl movie that's coming out. That movie has supposedly already gone through 8 test screenings. Usually you have 1. They've already done 8. That's crazy to think that a movie has been seen and reseen that many times, and they keep massaging and tweaking and reshooting. That's a sign that something's very unhealthy in Hollywood. Again, the idea of having look, here is the writer's vision. Where usually you adapt it from a book and you turn it into a screenplay, and you have the screenwriter's vision in addition with the author's vision, and then it goes through the director's hands, and you have that director's vision, and here's the movie. And if you like it, great. And if you don't, that's okay, because maybe this movie was made for a specific audience and you're just not part of it. Again, those days are fairly well gone, and it's a sad thing. So like when I do pine for the movies of the 80s, go and grab a list from any year in the 1990s of the top 20 movies and look at the wide variety. You'll have blockbusters and you'll have avant-garde films and everything in between, as opposed to just constantly funneling blockbuster after blockbuster after blockbuster. Because when you focus heavily on the audience feedback in all these test screenings, you lose control of creativity. It's now the audience is the one that gets to say. Now the audience truly does have a say because they're the ones paying to see the film, but the problem is, should they be tweaking and changing? And a lot of times when you give people test screenings, they're not super artistic and critical. They're people who got the privilege of getting to go to test screenings. And those folks like to go to more test screenings. They like to be part of the inside group. So as a result, are they being good critics? Are they being honest about what's good and what's bad? Or are they being, hey, no, happy, clappy, that was good, we love it. That's one of those things that you just, you need people who are good and honest. And they should be the people on the inside, not the outside. That way, when you do finally produce your material and put it out for the audience consumption, it resonates. And then another thing that's a huge issue in current Hollywood that's become a major problem, and that's the idea of sequels and remakes and franchises. This is probably one of the biggest killers of Hollywood in the last decade. I mean, we had 2025, 2024 were just absolutely jam-packed. The vast majority were sequels or remakes or prequels. And this is something that you just, when you hear these new movies that are coming out, they're very rarely new movies. They're almost all sequels or prequels or remakes. Wouldn't it be nice if they just made new films? Well, they don't want to for a variety of reasons. Part of it's because they're lazy. Part of it's because they want to fix the narrative problems of the old ones and bring it up to a modern audience standard, that kind of thing. But again, we would like to see new things. Now, the reason, again, why they do like to make sequels and prequels also is because, well, if it made $1 billion, if we make a second one, maybe it'll make $1 billion too, or a third, or a fourth, or a fifth, or a 10th. Now, this used to be like an area of joking. Like, how many Friday the 13th movies are there? No idea at this point. I mean, they're just tons of them. But that's one of those things where they're just out there just running the crazy story just for the sake of doing it. It's not like they're just counting on it being a cash cow, But nowadays, that's what you see. So it used to be sequels were rare. I mean, the idea of sequels, just not very common. You go back in history, and how many were there in the 70s and 80s where you'd have sequels and, more than just like a single follow-up, but maybe having a trilogy, let alone 4. That'd be really weird. I mean, you have to go back and look at, say, like the Godfather trilogy, Star Wars trilogy, Indiana Jones, the initial trilogy, and you're going back, and thinking, how many more are there? I mean, there's some Dirty Harry movies that had sequels to them, but there weren't a lot of trilogies. Now it's common that you have tons of remakes, or not just remakes, but just sequels and prequels and things like that. Just tons and tons of them. It's not uncommon at all to see, again, look at the movie list of the new movies that were released in 2024, 25, 26. And then start going through and seeing how many are prequels, sequels, remakes. It's just loaded with them. Because, again, it's lazy and it's easy. We'll just have the same characters, do the same thing, twist it up a little bit with a new storyline, and just count the money rolling in. I mean, it's just a common formula. But it also squashes any kind of creativity. So if you have something new that you would like to push, no, we want the sort of thing of this sequel, prequel, or remake. I've actually joked a long time that if they ever want to do a remake, they should go back into the 70s and 80s and find movies that didn't do well. Because when they want to do remakes, they almost always find a beloved movie and want to remake it. It's like, why would you? We love the old movie. Why? No, don't do that. That's bad. And they always flop, but it's one of those things that they just think they need to do it and bring it up to speed for modern times. It's like, no, it's beloved for a reason. Find some movie that flopped and figure out why it flopped. So why did it flop in the 70s? Why did it flop in the 80s? And figure out, oh, it's because the script writing was terrible, or the acting was bad, or they didn't have a big enough budget. And then invest in it and go from there. If you're going to remake something, find something that flopped and make it better. Don't try to capitalize on something that's glorious and try to make it better. I mean, that's already a tough and tall order. So, other thing, of course, that's a major issue that we see in Hollywood, and that is the idea of comic, books being adapted to movies, video games being turned into movies, or television shows that are then turned into movies. And again, this is all based on the idea that familiarity will bring success in the box office. And sometimes it does. Obviously the Marvel Cinematic Universe is an absolute juggernaut, but it's died, and it's nearly dead. Some of its most recent movies have just not performed well. And the ones that did perform well were basically special one-offs. Like Deadpool and Wolverine had a bunch of cameos, and it relied on those cameos to generate positive word of mouth. The Spider-Man No Way Home, that one, it was also a cameo fest that counted on those member berries to get you to tune back in and watch it. It had good word of mouth. But a lot of the other Marvel movies of the past 5 years, they've just been on a stink fest after stink fest. And they just have not had nearly the audience that they expected them to have. And people are just done with what they've done with comic book superhero movies. And then with video game movies, again, a lot of times those aren't faithful either, because you have a built-in audience, people who already love the video games. So you take a video game that's sold like crazy and say, let's turn that into a movie. That'd be a great idea. Well, the problem is when you take that video game and then you change it to Hollywood it up and make it for a modern audience, well, as a result, you lose the people who are interested. So the people who were dying to see the video game adaptation are disgusted by what you did to their favorite franchise, and they don't tune in. And the new people, they don't care much about it because it's a video game. What would they care? And they don't tune in either, so they tend to die. And then with TV shows turned into movies, I mean, again, those are things that they've got some cool nostalgia flavor coming in, but they're also very well established. So if you're going to take it and then move it to the big screen, it has to feel like you're moving it to the big screen. It doesn't mean that you're going to take it and then totally mix it up and change it to make it a movie now, because people loved the TV show for a reason. So you should continue that for the movie. But when you take it and you change it and radically turn it upside down just because now we're going to Hollywood it up, again, people don't want to follow that and believe it and go with it. Of course, with these ones, what people really also count on is the whole idea of the merchandise tie-in. So Hollywood's hoping that if they take this video game and turn it into a movie, there's going to be cool merchandising options. They take a comic book, turn it into a movie, there'll be cool merchandising options. And again, it's one of those things that, a lot of the merchandising days, they're just not as strong as they used to be, because one, I think you don't see too much in the way of good merchandise work anyway. And two, I don't know that people these days buy it like they used to, because it used to be a cultural phenomenon to have some cool things. To go to school with the Happy Days lunchbox was a big deal, but now you don't have cultural phenomenons like that anymore, so people don't feel that motivated to do that kind of a thing. So the merchandise doesn't work as well. The other thing that we talk about, the idea too that comes into play, is we feel kind of overloaded with merchandising, and also product placements and things like that. We just don't really care. I don't know how many people are going to feel motivated to go to Burger King to get a value meal that's based off of a movie. Again, it used to be if there was a cultural tie-in, you'd want to have those things because they were kind of neat and kind of collectible. But when it's just cheap, crappy toys and stuff that don't really hold up more than 5 minutes, there's not really anything special there. I mean, when you'd have some cool tie-in of a piece of merchandise that was actually durable and useful, those were kind of special. They were kind of neat. But there's such a proliferation. Every movie has some kind of fast food tie-in. Every movie has this kind of, tie-in here and this product over here, and you just feel overwhelmed by it, and you're like, enough. It's not special now. If there's just tons of it everywhere, it's just not special. And we're just not that interested in it anymore. And frankly, we don't want to see the tie-ins and things like that. We don't mind when things are subtle, but when they're trying to capitalize on everything, it feels sometimes like you're sitting in a long commercial. I don't want to be in a commercial. I want to, go see a movie. Don't preach to me about a product you're trying to sell during a movie. The other problems that come into play are, basic digital problems that we have. This could be like piracy. It could be the cost of doing the work. The digital age has been wonderful for film in that we can now go a lot of places that we could never imagine going before in film. That's really cool. The downside is it's expensive to do those things, and the worst part is we have now incredible over-reliance on it. Watch movie credits sometimes as they're rolling. And you get through the cast of actors, great. Yeah, they're there, wonderful. And then all of a sudden, you start seeing all the different names of everything. It used to be you'd see all the people who are involved in the photography and the videography work, the lighting, all the stagecraft and costumes, and all of the practical effects people, the set builders and all this stuff. Now it's just a list of hundreds of people who are visual effects artists, just hundreds of them. And so no longer do you have this idea of, we could just go out, shoot, have these practical effects, and just have a real grounded story. Well, we have to have something bigger and more dynamic and more special and more weird and more fantastical. Well, we have to do all that with digital effects. So it's expensive. And like I said, we over-rely on it to the point where, we miss the idea of a good, true, gritty, down-to-earth, realistic thing. I mean, where do we spend most of our lives in realistic, down-to-earth things? So to see humans struggle to have good human stories, we don't see many of those anymore. It's all humans doing super amazing things over here and going off to space and doing this amazing thing there. We just don't see the stories of the now, the real, the struggle that we have, or the victories, or the romances, or the comedies, that stuff. I mean, you almost never see those things nowadays. And that's a problem that hurt movies too. And the last thing is, I just kind of hinted at there, the idea of what's allowed and what's popular. Like, you look at things like romances and comedies. Well, with all the social engineering and stuff that we have going on in the world, especially in the last decade, you're not allowed to tell certain jokes anymore. You're not allowed to have certain people represented one way or another. And you have to make sure you have other people represented. And if you don't, you're going to be in big trouble. And if you want to be accepted for Oscar nomination, you have to have all of these DEI quotas. Did you know that? There are tons of DEI quotas that your film has to have to even be considered for award shows. So if you want to try to get an award, you have to have all of these things. So you wonder why everything's jammed into movies these days, because they're required to do so if they want to get an award. And a lot of them want to jam it in there anyway because they want you to think a certain way. So again, that social engineering that's going on, instead of telling all of these huge varieties of stories, they're all telling the same story, and that's you're going to accept what we want you to accept. And they force it in you all the time. People are tired of that too. I mean, look how few people are going to movies nowadays. Unless it's something where the rumors come out and find out, no, it's not chock full of social engineering, then people tend to go and buy it. Go and buy the tickets and watch it. As soon as the word gets out that it's DEI laden, people don't want to touch it because they're just tired of being lectured to. I don't want to go. I want to laugh. I want to be in awe. I want to cry. I want to leave feeling patriotic. All of these different things I want to feel. I don't want to go for 2 hours and feel like I've been lectured to for 2 hours. I don't want that. Nobody wants that. There are very few, which is why a lot of your modern movies have such small audiences. It's the big problem of I just don't want to be in that space. I'm tired of being in that space. I'll just stay home. Thank you very much. And I'll pop in my old movie of Jaws and watch that and not have to worry about that because the shark doesn't discriminate. He eats everybody. So it's one of those things that we just kind of shrug off and just don't care too much for movies. And the very last thing, which is not too small of a thing, and I don't mean to make it totally minimalized, but it is this thing that just popped in my head. And that's the idea that they're so quick to move things to streaming nowadays because they're streaming platforms that have to have content. If you're going to have a 24-hour streaming content or streaming platform, you have to have content. And you have to have content that people want, so you have to put new things on there. So they put a movie, instead of leaving it in the theaters for 3 or 4 months, it's gone in 40 days. So if you don't see a movie in the first month, it's gone. And what that does is a lot of people just go, why should I pay, $10, $12, $15 for a ticket, $10 for concessions. So I'm out $20, $25 when I can just wait a month and watch it on my streaming service. I'll just wait. In ye olden days, you'd have a movie that was out for like 3 years or 3 months into the theater, and then you'd have to wait maybe 2 or 3 or 4 months before it was put out on video at the rental stores. And then you'd wait another few months after that before they'd sell the videos at the local department stores. Nowadays, like I said, if you've got that 45-day window and they're on streaming and no big deal. So why go? Why rush? Why pay all that money when you could just wait? So those are some of the reasons why you have such a problem of why Hollywood is putting out such lousy stuff lately, and why movies are kind of in a almost death spiral right now. Let's hope they can fix it and figure it out. But the problem is they've made the mess. They've bought into the mess, and they don't seem to be letting up from the mess. Maybe they'll fix it. Let's hope they do, because the movies are special. The movies are fun, and it's a good time to go to the theaters and enjoy those things. So we'll see what happens in the coming weeks, months, and years. That's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in this long anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.